The Agenda this week spoke to author Angela Saini about sexist science, explored what we know and don't know about antidepressants, heard the argument for taking a public health approach to gun violence, and evaluated the accessibility of post-secondary education in the province. The Agenda's Week in Review begins with author Amy Chua on staring down political tribalism.
Human beings are tribal animals. We need to belong. Studies show that we just absolutely crave membership. And once we connect to a group, we tend to want to cling to it and defend it no matter what, and see it as always being right. And that's actually not always bad. You know, I'm a very tribal person. Family is a kind of tribalism, sports tribalism. The problem is when tribalism takes over the political system.
Well, as it appears to have done so in your country right now.
It really has. And the problem with that is that you start to see everything through the lens of your tribe. And it's almost like any news item will happen. Gun control, North Korea, really anything. And instead of having a conversation and thinking, what should I think? You kind of figure out what your leaders are saying. You hunker down into your positions, and then you start blasting the other side. And it doesn't even matter if 3 years ago you were saying the opposite thing. So it's really prevented people from having a conversation. And it's almost like we are in a situation, you know, studies show that one actually takes pleasure from seeing the other side lose or suffer. So in some sense, we're not really having a substantive political dialogue now, but just rather two sides trying to demonize and take down the other side.
At what point did you notice that starting to happen? That namely, it doesn't even matter if I win. It's not enough for me to win the argument. You have to lose the argument, and I don't have to listen to anything you say anymore.
Well, this stuff is documentable. It's not just a feeling. You know, if you can look at Pew Foundation studies and surveys, you can see, just take something like immigration. Even just 20 years ago, the Democrats and the Republicans, there was much more overlap. You know, it's a very complicated issue. Some people favored it, some people are against, and people change their minds. If you look at the polls right now, the Republicans are way more extreme in their views. You know, they want to cut down even on legal immigration. And the Democrats are similarly way more extreme. You know, you can't use the word illegal. We're only talking about undocumented. And there's much less convergence in the middle. And that's true of all the hot button issues. So, you know, it's been a gradual process, but part of this really is because of a demographic change that we've had.
Talk to me about that change, the demographic change that America has experienced in the last, what period of time do you think is responsible for this?
Well, it started in the 1960s when we had massive changes in our immigration laws that allowed people like my own parents to come over. And so most of the United States history, most of our immigrants came from Europe. They were white. And so for most of America's 200-year history, this was a country that was dominated economically, politically, and culturally by a white majority. Now, obviously, it's complicated who counted as white. It changed a little bit over time, but that was the basic dynamic. In the last 30 years, we've had a massive demographic change, partly just in terms of sheer numbers, you know, going from something like 600,000 a year to 7 million. Secondly, at the source of the immigration. It used to be most of our immigrants came from Europe. Now, the vast majority come from Asia, Latin America, Africa, the Caribbean. So the result is that we are seeing what people call the browning of America. And that is that for the first time in U.S. history, America's whites are on the verge of losing their status as a majority. And going to your question, when you say, when did you start to notice? That's partly what's happened. It used to be that it was the minorities who were threatened in the United States. For obvious reasons. Now, it's not just African Americans and Asian Americans who feel threatened or discriminated against. Whites feel threatened. A recent study showed that 67% of America's white working class feel that they are more discriminated against than minorities. And, you know, not just Muslims and Jews feel threatened. Christians now feel threatened. It's a big part of our political rhetoric. Men and women, straights and gays, everyone feels threatened. And when groups feel threatened, that's when they retreat into tribalism. They get more insular.
I would like our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring this graphic up here. In 2013, the University of Pennsylvania published a study that looked at almost 1,000 MRIs and found that male brains have more connections within each hemisphere, while female brains are more interconnected between hemispheres. And this made headlines around the world, including the one we see here in the Atlantic magazine. Male and female brains really are built differently, said the headline. How much does this revelation matter as far as you're concerned?
Well, this is one of the studies that I look at in the book. I devote an entire chapter to it. It was very popular. It was covered all over the world. And what it seemed to suggest is that we must think differently because our brains are different. Now, we have to understand the context of this. For more than 100 years, scientists, neurologists have said that women are less smart because their brains are smaller. Yes, our brains are on average smaller because we are on average a little bit smaller. So that difference, famously, there was an article about 100 years ago that said the difference was 5 ounces. But then a small man will also have a smaller brain. Our brains are perfectly in proportion with our bodies. And at the same time, we've also learned that average IQ between men and women is identical. So there is no connection there. And in fact, there was a female scientist more than a century ago who made the very pertinent and brilliant insight to say that if absolute brain size was a measure of intelligence, then humans would not be the most intelligent species. That would be a whale or an elephant. Right. So it's about relative brain size, and in that sense, we're all in proportion. But anyway, this study in particular, now we have to remember, within neuroscience, this is still, despite the sophisticated technologies that are now being used, we are in the very early days of understanding the brain. It's almost like poking the outside of a computer with a stick, but not quite having turned it on yet. So, looking at the structure of the brain is not really a reliable way of knowing what's going on inside it, how we're thinking. But that aside, structural differences have been found in some studies. The problem with this study is that, many critics have pointed this out within science, within the scientific academy, that they were cherry-picking the kind of results that they wanted to see. They highlighted those results and they kind of neglected the ones that didn't fit within that paradigm. The more worrying aspect was the speculation that was laid onto this. So even if there are structural differences, which we don't know yet that there really are, but even if there were, to go and then suggest that this means something. So for example, one of the researchers told the press that this means that women are better multitaskers. They have more connections between the two sides of their brain. Actually, the researcher is not able to tell us that. And when I interviewed the lead researcher about this, he said, actually, that was incorrect. She shouldn't have done that because the research can't tell us that. So, at the time that these publications come out, we have to remember lots of things come into play. These are scientists who want more funding, who want their research to hit the headlines, who may slightly overstate the case because of it. And then when the research gets made public, people read stuff into it which may not necessarily be there. Well,
that's the point. I mean, this happened 5 years ago, and I don't recall seeing corresponding headlines 5 years later saying, actually, you know what we said 5 years ago? It's not quite right.
Well, that's exactly what they said to me, that it wasn't quite right. And the lead researcher said to me that many years ago, and he is one of the main neuroscientists working on sex difference in the US, and he said to me many years ago, he used to describe male-female brains as being sexually dimorphic. So dimorphic means as different, hard difference, the way that our reproductive systems are different. I can have a baby, you cannot have a baby. That's a hard fact. And he used to think that brains were that way. And he says he doesn't do that anymore.
If suicides are one of the most significant, or I think you said number one, issue with gun violence, why don't we talk about it more?
I think, I think we're in the case of suicide, we need to talk about gun regulation, because in a moment of depression, you shouldn't have a gun available to you, right? And so we've got to address that. And we can look at different countries around the world about the number of shootings. But for me, can I go back to the earlier question about, those statistics? I would have said 8 years ago, those statistics make a lot of sense to me, But I would say, since I've become a school board trustee in 2010, I've attended 7 funerals of young men who've been killed. And I've, you know, I've talked to community members. There's one young woman who graduated from one of my high schools, and she lives in a townhouse complex. And one day she was walking out of her house with her mother, and she sees her friend at the next house, and she waves to him, and then they're walking out, and this car pulls up, 4 guys get out and start shooting at her friend. So she grabs her mom, they go back in the house, they lock the door, they barricade the door, and then they realize their friend is waiting for them in a car out front. So they start phoning their friend. They're in a panic, you know, about their friend. Finally, she answers the phone. She's hiding under the steering wheel on the floor of her car. Her car has been shot up. And so, you know, by this time, the police are coming, the guys have taken off. And so her sisters were in schools in my area. And so her sisters, she told me, we're too afraid to go to school. So we sent a social worker out, and, you know, that settled things down enough. But I started to realize as a trustee, I came across incidents like this more and more often. And I realized that there's a lot of street trauma that comes with every incident of gun violence. And that's why I brought forward the motion. That's why I did some research on this. And what the research shows is that from birth to adulthood, there are impacts, health impacts of exposure to community violence. And for most of us in the city, you know, gun violence is something we read about in the newspaper, some statistics like that. But for people living in violent communities, it's a daily thing. There's the fear, there's the trauma, there's the, you know, depression, anxiety, PTSD. All these things are showing up in the research, and they're in people's lived experience. And that's the purpose of that motion.
So again then, if the traditional approach to the example that Chris just gave would be to send the police out en masse and start to make some arrests and tackle it that way. What's the new approach, the different approach that you think might pay dividends?
Well, some of the different approaches that people are rolling out in different cities with pretty good effect. So a colleague of mine, Andy Papachristos, who has done a lot of work that Dr. Slutkin draws from, has done some work looking at social networks of particularly at-risk youth in neighborhoods where there are a lot of shootings. And what they find in this body of work is that there's a small group of individuals who commit the most, or who are at the most risk of committing gun violence, and that there's a small group of people who are similarly most at risk of getting shot. And so the idea is, can we figure out who those people are, and can we intervene and, you know, direct and funnel resources towards them?
Intervene in what way?
By connecting them to social workers, connecting them to community activists, giving them supports if they're getting out of prison, and just basically, you know, taking a different approach and not assuming that, you know, the only way to stop gun violence is to arrest people and to sort of go into these communities and, you know, increase the trauma that Chris was talking about when you have police coming in and knocking down doors.
If they're part of a gang, do they want to have anything to do with social workers?
A lot of times, so this is the surprising thing, a lot of my work has been done in South Central Los Angeles, which people call the gang capital of the world. And what you find is that if you talk to young people, a lot of them want to get out. Yeah. They want to find an alternative to that life. But for various reasons, they're sort of in it, you know, for a long time. And they have friends who are in that life, and so they just need to be given an opportunity to get out.
At the risk of asking what sounds like an incredibly naive question here, how easy is it to get a gun in this capital city of ours?
Very easy.
Really?
Yes. So
how do you do it?
I don't know exactly how you do it. I haven't actually tried to procure a gun illegally. Obviously, there are legal ways to get a gun, which is not as easy. But the thing about it, what we're finding out now is that there are significantly more domestic guns being used in homicide. So originally, the thought was always that most of these guns are being smuggled across the border. Yeah. But what's beginning to happen is that guns that are originally purchased legally are then finding their way onto the black market. So whether it's people buying guns legally and then selling them onto the black market, or whether these guns are then being stolen. But in some of the work that I've done, I was speaking to a mother, and her 14-year-old son told her that with $200, he could get a gun by the end of the school day. So that's very easy to get a gun, yes.
People take these antidepressants, some people do, for a very long time. Some of them are on them for years and years and years. Do we yet have a good understanding of the impact on the mind and the body of someone who's on these things for years?
Well, I think we probably could identify people who've taken even some of the first generation antidepressants for more than 30 years. and they've actually been helped significantly. The issue really is that registration of a new antidepressant, certainly through FDA or Health Canada, through the Food and Drug Administration,
in the States,
really requires short-term hurdles to be passed. So perhaps 3 consistently positive trials would be enough over 8 weeks. That's really not giving information about the long term. So there are some other agencies that would require at least a 6-month, what might be called a relapse prevention design, where people have all responded. Some are switched to a placebo, some stay on the active drug, and you look at whether the drug continues to provide an advantage. And there's fairly robust evidence, indeed, from one of Dr. Ioannidis' colleagues, John Geddes, who's also on the Cipriani paper, of the success of maintenance treatments. So I think the issue is a complicated one. People have a sense that they would be better to not take antidepressants over the long term, so they would like to come off them. There's no doubt that there are drug discontinuation, or what some people would call withdrawal effects, particularly if you do it too quickly.
Sure, let me pick up on that, because John, I'm sure you saw the front page story in the New York Times yesterday, which was really quite significant in detailing, for many people who have been on antidepressants for many, many years, the difficulty they have withdrawing from these drugs and how their lives are, really quite messed up, given the consequences of trying to get off the medication. It's almost, I think some of them said, worse than the original depression that they were dealing with in the first place. What do we do about that?
So I think that we have to be very cautious. We do have some evidence on long-term use of antidepressants, but it's far more limited compared to the evidence that we have on acute use. So the recent Lancet paper where I was involved included only trials that had looked at 8 weeks of follow-up, more or less. This is the acute setting. It says nothing about what would happen in the longer term. There are some trials that have looked at the longer term. There are not 522 trials like the acute phase. And obviously, as you realize, the people who stay on board for these trials are even more selected. Some of them perhaps would indeed get benefits, and others would probably have a very hard time using these drugs, and even more so trying to get off these drugs at some point. We just need more evidence on long-term follow-up, and I would argue that eventually we're not treating depression just to get a quick response within a few weeks and satisfy our curiosity of improving some of the depression scales like the Hamilton scale. We're doing it because we want these people to be functional and have lives that they enjoy in the long term. And that means that the outcomes that I would like to see captured in clinical trials for depression would be things like depression leading to suicide or suicide attempts, loss of job, marital problems, divorce, things that do really matter rather than just a scale that can be assessed in a quick and dirty manner, but is very rudimentary.
Okay, Tamina, I want to ask you about your practice, okay?
Okay.
Somebody comes in, meets you, prospective patient,
Yes.
says they're feeling depressed.
Yes.
How do you make the assessment? I guess on what criteria do you make the assessment on whether or not this patient is a good potential candidate for antidepressants or not?
Right. I'm first going to mention that I look after 95% of my practice is people admitted to hospital against their will. So it's already a different subset of the psychiatric population.
So in almost all your cases, medication is
warranted.
Advised.
It is advised. But having said that, it's also my responsibility to rule out other medical presentations that can mimic a biological depression, if we're talking about depression. I also have to be considerate of other diagnoses which include depression as part of its diagnosis, for instance, bipolar disorder. And so I have to be very careful not to initiate an antidepressant without posing a risk of inducing mania as well.
That's a lot of responsibility, actually, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, I'm lucky I'm here today.
We live in a country that can afford free tuition. I mean, I think even everybody deserves universal access to education, even kids of some of our wealthiest. I think where some of the problems lie is like in the tax loopholes that exist. Every year, $50 billion of taxes goes uncollected. And that's enough to fully fund the education system. And that's every year. So I think no matter which family you come from, you deserve that right to education.
And Indigenous students, we were talking about it a little earlier. In the North, they're disproportionately they're not represented in post-secondary institutions. Why should we all be concerned about that?
I think we're leaving a section of our demographic behind. Indigenous youth is the fastest growing demographic in the country, and those are youth that we could be empowering to be contributing to the economy. But if we're not providing them the same supports that we're providing to youth in major cities and municipalities, we're essentially setting those youth up to fail.
So you want to add something?
Yeah, you know, at Pathways, we do have a number of our programs across the country serve Indigenous students as well. And what we hear from them are the things that Cody just talked about is Indigenous students also would like the opportunities and the choices that everybody across Canada has. It is part of their right, whether they're First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. And they are the fastest growing segment. And so to your question around value or how are we going to afford education long term, how we can't afford not to. If we want Canada to be a prosperous nation, we need to enable all of our young people to be successful. And it doesn't matter who you are or where you live, you should have access to the opportunity of education, the opportunity of learning. And I would add experiential learning to that as well, because we've been talking quite a bit about the formal education system, but there is another whole element, and Jim, you're nodding your head, around experiential learning. And that starts in the youngest years, going into the high school years, and that's what shapes your future ideas of what you can accomplish, and then having that opportunity after high school to continue to build on your experiences coupled with a formal education is so important. And if we don't support all of our students across the country, regardless of who they are or where they live, I think we're doing all of us a disservice.
For the future of Canada.
Exactly.
We only have a few minutes left, but Fiona, based on what research shows, how early should early intervention begin to help change the path of higher risk students?
I think there is a lot of debate about that, but I think as early as absolutely possible. I mean, one of the things that we see is literacy rates start taking hold in grade 3. Right? As early as grade 3, you start to see a gap in literacy rates between low-income and high-income youth. Right? Those literacy rates have a long-term impact on your ability to academically achieve and get into post-secondary. So that early. When we tell all students from a very early age that they have choice and that their educational pathways, anything is possible, and then we support them in getting there, that's what we should be doing.
I want to ask you about this program in Indianapolis that aims to give all students access to education beyond high school. Can you tell us about that?
So this program is actually really good because it's very, very simple. What it says is if you are in the program, we guarantee you free tuition to any institution in Indianapolis.
So right? University, college, whatever you want.
Anywhere you want to go. Full tuition. All you have to do is stay in the program and graduate from the program. And there are very high expectations. You have to get a high GPA to graduate from the program. But then they also give you all the supports, the mentoring, which is extraordinarily important, the peer mentoring, academic tutoring, extracurricular activities, to be able to actually round out your expectations and your aspirations. And they bring in parental engagement as well, which is really, really important, as Sue knows. They involve the parents in the program, and students do really well when they graduate from this program and go on to post-secondary.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, the 13th of April, 2018. Hope you don't suffer from triskaidekaphobia. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety at tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and on our Twitter feed at twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.